You think you're missing something when you abstain? But what if it's the opposite? What if absence is the secret language of the soul trying to speak to you? Most people run from emptiness. But Jung said, that's where the self lives. You were trained to fill every silence, and that's why you've never heard your inner voice. But today, you'll learn to decode what that silence has always been trying to reveal. Abstinence is not about deprivation, it's about revelation. When you stop chasing the next pleasure, you begin to notice the silence inside. That silence isn't empty. It's full of answers you've been too distracted to hear. In a world addicted to stimulation, choosing absence becomes a radical act. And in that act, the soul whispers, now I can finally speak. Jung didn't see abstinence as sacrifice. He saw it as sacred space, a clearing in the forest of the mind, where the deeper self emerges from the shadows. Because when you remove the noise, what's left is truth. And truth is rarely comfortable, but it's always transformative. The first step to transformation is learning to sit with the discomfort of yourself. Most people confuse abstinence with self-punishment, but it's the opposite. It's not a rejection of pleasure, it's an invitation to presence. When you say no to external gratification, you say yes to inner clarity. That clarity is not loud, it doesn't scream, it waits. It waits for you to get quiet enough to hear what you've been ignoring. The body reacts first. Tension, itch, craving. But these are not enemies. They are messages, signals from a mind detoxing from distraction, begging for stillness. You begin to realize how much your attention was being hijacked. And in that realization, you start to reclaim your mind. Discipline begins here, not in control, but in curiosity. Why do I want this so badly? What am I avoiding? Abstinence turns you into your own mirror, reflecting your hidden longings. And once seen, they lose power, not because they vanish, but because you are no longer ruled by them in the dark. This is what Jung meant by integration, the act of becoming whole. Not by adding more, but by subtracting what no longer serves. The abstinent path doesn't offer fireworks, it offers stillness. And in that stillness, the real self begins to bloom. Not the version shaped by society, but the voice beneath thee. Noise, many fear silence because they fear what it might reveal. But the soul only speaks when you stop interrupting it. When you abstain, you're not rejecting life. You're choosing a deeper life, a life where pleasure is conscious, not compulsive, where every no becomes a doorway to a more authentic yes. There's a secret hidden in restraint, a doorway Jung walked through. He knew that the more you run from emptiness, the louder it chases you. But when you turn toward it with open eyes, something changes. You stop being a slave to your desires, and you start becoming the architect of your own inner world. Abstinence reveals the architecture of the soul. Its cracks, its echoes, its forgotten corridors. What you find there isn't always beautiful, but it's real. And from that reality, you can finally build something lasting. Not just a life, but a foundation for meaning. Self-discovery doesn't begin with answers. It begins with space. Space to question, to feel, to fall apart, and reorganize. Abstinence is that space. A pause, a sacred interruption. It disrupts the momentum of your conditioning. And in that disruption, new consciousness begins to form. There is a rhythm to abstinence, like the breath before speech. It teaches you to hold, to wait, to listen, to remember that you are not your impulses. You are the awareness watching them rise and fall. And in that awareness, something ancient awakens. You start to see patterns, not just in your habits, but in your history. How your need for comfort has shaped your decisions. How every distraction was an attempt to avoid a deeper truth. But truth doesn't disappear when ignored. It waits, and when it returns, it asks, "Are you finally ready to meet me?" This is why abstinence is not absence. It's attention, not suppression, but sacred observation. You are not trying to become someone new. You are unearthing who you've always been beneath the noise. And that process is not linear. It's cyclical, spiraled, deep, because every time you abstain, you encounter yourself again, not the surface self, but the one that watches in silence. That self has been there all along, waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to come home. There is a world inside you that you've never fully seen, not because it's hidden, but because it speaks a language you've forgotten. The unconscious doesn't knock. It whispers through symbols, slips, sensations. And most people never listen. They live on autopilot, unaware of what drives them. But abstinence opens the door to this inner terrain. When you stop numbing yourself, things begin to surface. Old memories, forgotten wounds, desires you never dared to name. They don't emerge to haunt you. They emerge to free you. Jung taught that what you don't face becomes your fate, and the unconscious, when ignored, controls you from the shadows. But how do you explore something you cannot see? You watch your reactions. You study your cravings. Each discomfort is a messenger from the depths. Each impulse is a flashlight, pointing to an unhealed part of you. And when you trace the light back, you meet your shadow. Abstinence isn't the end goal. It's the invitation, an invitation to descend, not into darkness, but into depth. Because real light is not found by avoiding the dark. It's found by walking through it with awareness. And that awareness is the beginning of transformation. The unconscious speaks in symbols, not logic, mythology. It appears in dreams, synchronicities, emotional triggers. When you abstain from noise, you begin to notice the messages. A dream that won't go away, a pattern that keeps repeating. All are clues in the labyrinth of your psyche. Jung called this journey individuation, becoming whole. It requires confronting the parts of yourself you've exiled, not to destroy them, but to understand them. Because every trait you deny doesn't vanish, it mutates, and the parts you reject in yourself often appear in others. This is why certain people trigger you, not because of who they are, but because of what they mirror. Abstinence creates the stillness to observe these reflections. You start seeing how your inner world shapes your outer one. And that seeing, it changes everything. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's necessary. You can't integrate what you won't admit exists. The unconscious isn't your enemy, it's your forgotten teacher. And when you invite it in, the war within begins to end, not with surrender, but with reconciliation. You realize how much of your suffering came from avoidance, from running from pain instead of learning from it. Abstinence slows the wheel down. It gives you time to ask, what is this really about? And that question becomes your compass. This journey is not linear, it spirals. You'll revisit the same wounds at deeper levels. Each time with more awareness, more compassion. That's the nature of real growth, slow, rooted, raw, and yet profoundly liberating. The more you explore the unconscious, the less it controls you. You begin to make choices, not from fear, but from freedom. You no longer react, you respond. And that shift, small as it seems, rewrites your entire reality. Because now, you are no longer asleep. You become your own therapist, your own guide, not perfectly, but consciously. And in a world ruled by distraction, that is a rare power. A discipline forged in silence, in solitude, in self-study. That's the soul of abstinence. Mindful, sovereign, awake. You stop fearing what's within because you've walked through it. And the monster you thought lived inside becomes your ally. You see now, it was never trying to destroy you. It only wanted to be seen, to be held. And through abstinence, you finally created the space to do so. So the journey continues. Deeper into the forest of your own mind, where silence is not emptiness, but invitation. And every step inward brings you closer to the self you forgot, the one that's been waiting behind the noise all along. Abstinence doesn't just change your habits, it rewires your mind. In the absence of constant stimulation, something extraordinary happens. Your brain begins to breathe again. Thoughts become clearer, emotions become quieter, awareness sharpens. It's not magic, it's the return to your natural rhythm. The mind is like a lake. Constant inputs stir it into chaos, but remove the noise, and the water settles. That still surface, it reflects everything with stunning clarity. You start to see yourself without distortion, and that's when transformation becomes possible. Clarity is not just a mental benefit, it's a survival tool. In a world built on distraction, a clear mind is rebellion. You begin to see through manipulation, trends, false desires. You recognize which thoughts are truly yours, and which were planted by fear, marketing, or trauma. Emotionally, abstinence is a reset. Without the roller coaster of dopamine highs and crashes, you stabilize. You're no longer chasing mood swings to feel alive. Instead, you create a deep, grounded baseline of presence. A presence that doesn't depend on anyone or anything. That emotional balance creates freedom, not numbness, but sovereignty. You feel without being swallowed. You observe without reacting. And in that space, real power is born. Abstinence builds discipline, not as control, but as capacity. The capacity to pause before reacting, to feel a craving, and choose not to feed it. Each time you do this, your neural pathways shift. You are literally sculpting a stronger mind. This is neuroplasticity in action. Abstinence trains your brain to delay gratification. And in that delay, maturity blooms. You become less impulsive, more intentional, less frantic, more focused. Think about how much energy is wasted on indulgence, scrolling, snacking, swiping. Little leaks of life force. When you abstain, you stop the leak. That energy returns to you, undiluted, and with it, clarity, creativity, and confidence. You start making decisions from a centered place, not out of lack, but from alignment, not to escape, but to express. That's a psychological shift most never experience, because most never slow down long enough to feel it. You also reclaim emotional authority. You stop outsourcing your feelings to external triggers. No more needing validation to feel worthy, no more substances to feel safe. You become emotionally self-sufficient. And this isn't about perfection, it's about resilience, the ability to be present with discomfort and still choose growth, to sit with sadness and not medicate it away, to honor pain as a teacher, not a sentence. Over time, abstinence becomes a sanctuary, not a prison of denial, but a place of inner restoration. Your nervous system softens, your anxiety quiets, not because the world changed, but because your relationship to it did. This is how abstinence transforms from discipline into devotion, a sacred practice of listening, feeling, waiting, of reconnecting with your inner voice without interference. And once you've heard it clearly, you can never go back, because you've tasted a deeper kind of peace. But peace is not the end, it's the beginning, because from this inner equilibrium, you're finally ready to bring abstinence into the rhythm of daily life, to integrate it not as a break, but as a way of being. And that leads us to the next step. Abstinence doesn't need to be extreme, it needs to be intentional. It's not about withdrawing from life, it's about returning to it, awake. And you don't need to escape to a monastery to begin. You start where you are, with what you have, one moment at a time. That's where the transformation lives, in the ordinary, made sacred. Begin with silence. 5 minutes a day, no phone, no agenda, just your breath. Let the noise rise, then let it pass. At first, it'll feel unbearable. That's good. It means you're finally hearing what was always there. Try a digital fast, not forever, but long enough to feel the shift. Notice how often you reach for your device without thinking. Every scroll is a fragment of your attention leaking away. When you stop, it feels like withdrawal, because it is. And on the other side of that craving is clarity. Food is another doorway. Not to diet, but to mindfulness. Practice eating without distraction. Chew slowly. Feel each flavor. Notice how much of your hunger is emotional. Abstinence here means presence, not punishment. And presence turns the mundane into medicine. Create off hours in your day, sacred windows of stillness. Time with no input, no output, just being. You'll resist it at first. Your nervous system is conditioned for noise, but stillness is a muscle. And abstinence is how you train it. Eventually, that pause becomes your power. Write, not to perform, but to reveal. Journaling turns the unconscious into ink. It captures the subtle shifts you'd otherwise miss. And over time, those pages become a mirror. Not of who you show the world, but of who you really are. Practice saying no, not to punish, but to protect. Every no creates space for a deeper yes. You're not closing doors. You're curating your life. Abstinence here becomes boundary, and boundaries become the blueprint of inner peace. Seek out boredom and stay with it. Let your mind wander without direction. It will panic, protest, beg for stimulation. But boredom is fertile soil for soul messages. Wait long enough, and something ancient begins to speak. Abstain from complaining, from gossip, from urgency. These seem harmless, but they drain your spirit. Practice the discipline of quiet influence. Let your presence speak louder than your noise. That is real mastery. Subtle, silent, strong. Replace consumption with creation. Instead of watching, make. Instead of numbing, feel. Abstinence is not just about removal, it's about redirection. Turning energy inward, then letting it emerge as something new. This is how transformation becomes tangible. Use rituals to anchor the practice. Light a candle before journaling. Walk in nature without music. Small acts, done with reverence, rewire your relationship with time. They signal to your brain, this moment matters. And what matters shapes who you become. Remember, abstinence is not an event. It's a rhythm. It adapts to your season, your needs, your evolution. Some days you'll fail. Some days you'll forget. But even those moments teach, because discipline isn't about perfection. It's about returning, and when you return often enough, it becomes who you are. Not someone who abstains for applause, but for alignment, because you've tasted the depth that only silence can give. And once you've lived from that place, noise feels unbearable, not because it's evil, but because it's too small for your soul. So start small, stay steady, stay honest. Abstinence is not for the faint of heart, but for the deep of heart. And the deeper you go, the more you'll realize. You weren't made to escape the world. You were made to meet it from within. Abstinence is not about what you remove. It's about what you make room for. When the noise fades, the self rises. Not the self others told you to be, but the one that was waiting in silence all along. That voice you've been hearing in the quiet, that's not boredom. That's your soul, remembering its own name. This isn't just a psychological trick. It's a spiritual awakening. Because when you stop chasing, you start receiving. When you stop speaking, you start listening. And what you hear in that stillness might change your life forever. But the question is, will you dare to listen? Most people won't. They'll click away, scroll on, numb out. But you're still here. That means something. It means a part of you is ready, hungry, curious. You don't need another distraction. You need depth, and depth doesn't shout. It whispers, just like the soul. So now I ask you, what would happen if you took one full day of silence? What would rise if you stopped filling every space with noise? What parts of you have you never met simply because you never paused long enough to greet them? The answers aren't out there. They've been inside you all along. If this message spoke to something deep in you, don't let it fade. Comment below what part hit the hardest. Your words might awaken someone else. And if you want more journeys like this, subscribe, activate the bell, and stay with us. Because this isn't a one-time realization, it's a path, and we'll be here, walking it with you, one silent step at a time.